Perfect. So welcome all to our West Coast product people. Today we are having Sheri Byron Heber, and let's learn from Sheri why accessibility is important. Why we the UXer, either we are newcomers or experts, should be serious about it. Where to start from and how to get it into our process from day one. And I'm very thankful to my previous employer at Wells Fargo. I learned about the accessibility from day one, from there. When I started my basic, the professional career at Wells Fargo, that's the lesson number one. I got it from them because anybody can teach you about design, user experience design, and what have you. But learning the inclusive design is really, take some time and understanding and making sure that you can empathize properly with the user challenges, because the usable product means, when the accessible product means a usable product basically. And one of my friend, Gerard Cohen, I don't know if you guys ever heard of, he basically was my accessibility mentor over there. But who is Sheri? All right. So, in her own words, she is a senior accessibility evangelist and sought after writing and public speaking expert with a history of successfully architecting a strategic global accessibility program in a Fortune 200 environment, including deploying corporate policies, accessible digital property design, and remediation using LEAN and AGILE software development techniques, analytics, and maturity modeling. So I hope you guys have her LinkedIn profile link, but if you don't, I'm going to paste it here in the chat. So if you want to connect with her, please go ahead. And without further ado, I will give the mic to virtual podium to Sheri.
Well, thanks, Udashir. So let me see. Share screen. There we go. Slideshow. Oh God, I do this all the time. Speaking of usability, right?
Yeah.
When you go to share your screen, Zoom has this little teeny tiny checkbox down in the lower left corner called Share Sound. And so there's like no attention called to it at all. If you forget to check that box, then when you play a video, you don't hear anything.
Exactly.
So trying that again. All right, there we go. All right, so I am Sheri Byrne-Haber. As Udashir said, I am the accessibility architect at VMware. I started the VMware accessibility program about 2.5 years ago. I am a wheelchair user, and that's from a birth defect. And I also have a daughter who can't hear well. And so, I come to this from a very personal perspective about why accessibility is important. So you don't discriminate against people like me and my daughter, at one level. At another level, I have a degree in computer science, and I'm a lawyer, and I have an MBA. And what 3 fields are implicated in accessibility? Well, computer science, because you've got to be able to code it in an accessible manner. Law, because you have to be able to interpret the legal regulations behind accessibility. And business, because you have to be able to write up a business case for why to make something is accessible. So it turned out that my lived experience as somebody with a disability and the parent of somebody with a disability, combined with my educational experience, kind of led me to this field. It's just going on 17 years ago now. So I also do wheelchair archery. So this is me on my archery range at home on the top of the mountain that makes Silicon Valley a valley. And I do write a lot. I was the Medium 2020 UX Collective Author of the Year. And I founded the VMware Disability Employee Resource Group. So we had, I think, about 800 people at our last event. We get pretty big turnouts at our events where we bring in some really big name speakers who do deep dives on different types of disabilities. All right. So first of all, I'm going to start with some attention grabbing statistics. The first attention shocking statistic is 18. 18% of the US population identifies on the census, meaning government paperwork, so it's official, as having one or more disabilities. The number could actually be higher than that, because who gets left out of the census? People who are homeless, people who are undocumented. So those groups tend to have fairly high disability rates. The actual number is probably higher than this, but this is pretty much the lowest number you'll ever see quoted. Okay, $8 trillion is the spending power of people with disabilities globally. It's a whole lot of money. And it's not really a market that's being intentionally sought after on a regular basis, despite having all this money to spend. As somebody put it on LinkedIn yesterday, I have cerebral palsy, but my money's as good as anybody else's. And, you know, for some reason, businesses don't seem to think about that when they're trying to decide who their perfect customer is. And then finally, 92% of people with disabilities, so PWDs, that's just the abbreviation for people with disabilities, will head to a more accessible competitor without telling your business that they've gone if they can't use your website or your product. Okay, why aren't they going to complain? Because we've been complaining for a long time and we're kind of tired of complaining. It hasn't changed a whole lot. So people just don't have the time anymore. They go to a website, if it's not accessible and they need it to be accessible, they'll just go to the next one. Very few people complain. If you have one person complain, it probably means that you have 10 other people in the exact same situation who haven't complained. All right, so sorry about that. Definition of accessibility. Something is accessible when it can be equally used. Okay, so that's piece number one, has to be equal. We can't have to ask for help or have to run a special Chrome plugin or anything like that. By people with any disability or any combination of disabilities. You never know, somebody's not guaranteed to have only one disability. I use a wheelchair, but independently, I've also developed type 1 diabetes. And then independent of that, I also developed glaucoma, which affects my vision. So I actually have 3 completely separate disabilities, any one of which can impact me when I'm trying to use a website or product. So when most people think about disabilities, this is what they think about. They think about visible disabilities, such as Stephen Hawking or Marlee Matlin, who is deaf and uses American Sign Language. Stevie Wonder is a very well-known American singer who's blind. Owen, up here in the top left-hand corner, he gets referred to sometimes as the Xbox boy. He was part of a big Microsoft campaign over the Super Bowl in February of 2018. I guess it's been 3 years now, because Microsoft made their Xbox game usable by somebody with just one who had only one usable finger. They could still completely open the packaging, set it up, and play Xbox just like everybody else. And Madison Del Rosario, I have that Barbie in my office. I have a collection of Barbies with different disabilities. And I actually get to go back to my office in about a week. So I'm pretty excited about that. It's been a while. Okay, but disabilities are for these people too, okay? Invisible disabilities are 70% of the disabled audience. You have no way of knowing that any of the people who are represented on this slide are disabled. So Selena Lopez has lupus. She's had a kidney transplant. Millie Bobby Brown is the actress from Stranger Things. She's deaf in one ear. Bono also has glaucoma. That's why he wears those colored glasses. Unfortunately, the colored glasses don't help me. But he didn't want to let anybody know that he had glaucoma. So he just pretended, oh, well, I'm just from Hollywood and I want to be cool, right? He was actually hiding that he had glaucoma until he had a very bad cycling accident in Central Park because of his vision. And then he had to tell everybody, oh yeah, by the way, I have glaucoma. Lil Wayne, Elton John, and Prince all have epilepsy. And the reason why the colors for Facebook are all blue is because Mark Zuckerberg is colorblind. So all of these things are examples of hidden disabilities. They're disabilities that you would not be aware of unless the person who had the disability, told you that they had it, or somehow it's otherwise known on a public basis. Okay, the group of people with disabilities gets even larger when you look at permanent versus temporary versus situational. So there's actually 3 different types of disabilities. Permanent disabilities are probably the ones that you think about when you think about disability. That's like being born with a limb difference, for example, or developing cancer, or having attention deficit disorder. It's something that, well, the cancer one's not maybe the best example because it could be temporary, but a lot of times it's permanent. So those are all the kinds of things that people think about. But there are temporary and situational disabilities that can act just like permanent disabilities. So if somebody has to have surgery on their rotator cuff on their shoulder and their arm is in a sling, it acts just like that limb difference. The only thing is that it's a shorter period of time. It's not a permanent disability. It's got a finite expiration date that's associated with the recovery period from that medical treatment. And then that person might go back to being non-disabled. They're just disabled for a short period of time. There are situational disabilities. So somebody who's holding a baby, or somebody who's holding a bag of groceries, or a laptop briefcase, they're going to have the exact same disability, except it's even shorter than temporary. It's just for a very few minutes while that particular situation is happening. And then as soon as that situation is done, the disability is gone. So when you add these 3 groups of people up together, you're looking at approximately 25 to 30% of your consuming product, of your potential customers. Okay, all of a sudden, that's a lot of people. If 18% weren't enough, 30% is significant. And nobody wakes up in the morning and says, hey, you know what? That 30% of the customers with disabilities, I'm just going to ignore them today. Nobody wants to cut off 30% of their customers ever. That's just not a wise thing to do. And so what I'm going to do is, I think the next slide's the video. Yes. So I'm going to play this video for you. Hopefully it loads. If it doesn't load, I'll send Mudassir the deck when we're done with the presentation, and he can forward it out to you. I can also put, sorry, my internet's not the best where I am right now. I know, Cupertino, founder of Apple Computers, but come on, how do I copy this? It's not even letting me copy it from while I'm in slideshow mode. Anyways, this is a 2-minute video. It's really easy for you to find it online. It's called the SADY video. SADY is spelled S-A-D-Y. And it goes through a lot of forms of assistive technology. Assistive technology is what people with disabilities use to change something that they can't do or can't perceive and turn it into something that they can do or can perceive. So you go through this video and you watch a blind person taking pictures, and you watch a person with a wheelchair use their app to open up some blinds that they can't reach, and a child who can't read getting assistance with reading. And then the surprise twist at the end is that Sadie, who cannot speak and cannot dress herself, is actually the video editor on the video. And that's because Apple made their video editing software accessible to people who use switches. And the switch is what Sadie has up at the top of her head at her wheelchair. That's how she operates the computer. And with that, she is a professional video editor. Okay? People with disabilities are not disabled because of their medical conditions. People with disabilities are disabled when society puts barriers in front of us that keep us from being just like everybody else. Okay? If you build an inaccessible software, you're creating a barrier. If you build something with stairs and you don't have a ramp, you're creating a barrier. And so that's something that's really important to understand, because that gives you an entirely different perspective on what accessibility is and why you need it. Sorry, the video didn't load.
No
But I
worries.
think Carolina pasted a link in chat
Okay,
to the video.
thanks
Yeah.
for that. Okay, so the good news is there is a single standard that's used everywhere in the world to determine whether or not something is accessible. So it's put out by an organization called the World Wide Web Consortium. W3C.org is the name of the website, and it's called WCAG. And WCAG stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And there are several different versions. The only thing people argue about is what version of WCAG is the right version to follow. Okay, nobody argues whether or not WCAG should be followed, right? WCAG is the only international standard. So the EU's laws, the UK's laws, Canada's law, Australia's law, the US laws, a lot of laws in Asia Pacific, Japan and Korea and Hong Kong, they're all, and Israel, that's another one. They're all based on this WCAG standard. If anybody's got a law, it's based on this, on some variation of this standard. So there's 3 increasing levels of compliance at every level. So 2.0, AAA, AAA. 2.1, AAA, AAA. 2.2, AAA, AAA. So it's think of it as low, medium, and high, right? Nobody does high. You don't have to worry about AAA. There are a couple of like hospitals, banking, insurance companies will occasionally do AAA, but nobody is ever required to do AAA by law. That's just something that they've decided to do voluntarily. So most regulations have settled on AA. In the US, 2.0 AA became the standard. It's just coming up on its 3rd anniversary. And then EU law and some settlement agreements, when there's litigation, use the newer version, which is 2.1. The only difference between 2.0 and 2.1 is 2.0, because it came out in 2009, didn't address mobile. It literally came out the same month the first iPhone was released. So there's no mobile accessibility in 2.0 at all. There is mobile accessibility in 2.1. Okay, so now we're going to talk about what is it that people with disabilities do to determine whether or not a site is accessible when they first come to it. Okay, so they come to it and they want to know quickly, can I use this site? Can I not use this site? I want to make a quick and easy determination without putting a lot of energy or effort into it. So the first sign that a site is not accessible is if you see what we call an accessibility overlay. And there's a number of company names here on the right-hand side. I've probably missed a few. The whole concept of overlays is bad, because remember I said when you watch the Sadie video, you'll see all these people using assistive technology and using it, you know, as if they didn't have a disability. What's the common denominator with overlays is they replace people's assistive technology with their own tools, right? So you're taking something that somebody really knows how to use well and is really customized for their own purposes, and you're saying, here, we really want you to use this other thing instead. And that's not a good way to go about doing things. That actually creates a barrier out of the gate for the person with a disability. So if you see anything that looks like these little blue Vitruvian men, that seems to be the international symbol for some reason right now for accessibility overlays. This is actually from 3 different companies, even though they all look the same. That is a sign that an overlay is being used and the site itself is probably not accessible. So they're also called tools or plugins. They're aimed at improving website technology, but they really don't do a good job at it. The tests for the website still typically fail compliance review even after the overlay has been installed. You know, the US, it's a very litigious society here. So we've had 3,500 lawsuits just last year in the US alone over just website accessibility. And 10% of those cases were against companies that were using these overlays. So all the companies with the overlays were going, hey, buy our overlay and you won't get sued. Well, guess what? 10% of the people who got sued last year were using the overlays. So they don't live up to the marketing hype is the point that I'm trying to make. Part of the reason why they don't live up to the marketing hype is they don't actually fix the underlying code. They just try to replace that middle assistive technology layer and say, hey, use our assistive technology, it's better. And that's not the way the users really want to do it. Okay, disabled users have actually started actively blocking these widgets even from working. You know, if the customer that you're intending to benefit is blocking your software from working, chances are you haven't done a good job. Okay, second thing that people with disabilities look at is color contrast. If they see poor color choices, color is literally the easiest thing to fix on a website. If a website has made bad color choices, chances are none of the stuff that's hard is accessible either, because they haven't fixed the easiest thing that it is to fix. You know, you simply change a hex code and you've solved the problem. Another thing that people look at with respect to colors is color blindness. So in the tech field, because tech is, you know, 80% men, plus or minus at this point, 6.5% of people who work in tech are colorblind, because color blindness is a male-linked trait. So this is an example of a football game. You know, the NFL wanted to sell more jerseys. This was about 3 or 4 years ago. And so they said, okay, you know what, team 1, we're going to give you red jerseys. Team 2, we're going to give you green jerseys. And on the left-hand side, it's red and green. On the right-hand side is a simulation of what those jerseys look like to somebody who's colorblind. Okay, and there was this uproar because who watches football? Well, some women do, but it's mostly guys. And anybody who was colorblind couldn't tell the difference between these two teams unless they could see the helmets, and you can't always see the helmets. So if you're in an area where you have a lot of men being involved as potential customers, definitely don't use red and green together, because somebody who's colorblind isn't going to be able to distinguish between those two colors. Okay, another issue that's very easy to detect is whether or not a website has been designed to be responsive. If it doesn't respond, meaning automatically zoom correctly without having these horizontal scroll bars come up that you see at the bottom of the screen, that means that magnification won't work. Because magnification, or pinch to zoom on your phone, uses the exact same underlying technology as responsive website design does. So if it's not responsive, it's not going to pass the magnification test. Who uses magnification? Well, pretty much anybody over the age of 40 who wears bifocals. So if that is a target market of yours, it's especially important to be using to have good support for magnification. Maybe if you're doing a site for a children's game, it's not quite as important, but your app or your website would still be considered non-compliant. It's just not quite as important because your audience is not likely to have that particular disability. Okay, magnification, again, you don't want things to get blurry when they magnify. When you embed text inside images, it's not text anymore. Okay, it's just been turned into pixels. And when you magnify it, as is shown here, the edges start to blur. And this gets really problematic to read for people with disabilities. So in order to test these last two things, so the first thing was, do you see one of those silly blue Vitruvian men icons? The second thing is scan the page quickly for colors. Is anything not looking like it could be understandable by everybody? Third thing is do a Control++ or a pinch to zoom on your phone and see whether it correctly magnifies. Okay, we've just covered like 5 seconds of review that could potentially uncover several basic accessibility things that would tell the customer, hey, this site probably wasn't built with people with disabilities in mind. Okay, auto captions is another big one. We've got some custom captions on the left, and this is YouTube auto captioning on the right, where the sentence isn't even intelligible, partly because my friend Meryl is deaf, and so she's got a bit of what we call deaf speech to the way she speaks, partly because she lives in Wales, and so she's also got an accent from the region that she grew up in. So you definitely do not want to rely on your videos with auto captions. You want to do custom captioning scripts. There's also some business reasons for doing it. It improves your search engine optimization immensely. So that's probably the biggest business reason to do it, other than becoming compliant with the WCAG guidelines. It's also the biggest, you can get the biggest accessibility improvement for the least amount of money when you do custom captions, because people with hearing loss are going to be the largest potential community of people with disabilities. It's the largest congenital disability, and it's also a disability that gets acquired over time. And so you write a small check, nobody has to write any code. You send the check and the video, it's usually $1 a minute, to the contractors, and they send you back a custom captions file 2 days later. I mean, that's literally all there is to it. No coders, no QA, nothing else has to be done. It's really easy. Graphic descriptions for people who can't see are also really important. So if you look at this image and ask yourself, what would a blind person need to know in this image? Well, it all entirely depends on the context of how the image is being used. It could just be dog on beach. It could be dog wearing sunglasses on beach. It could be dog wearing sunglasses in a hammock on beach, if it was in a sale for something having to do with hammocks. Or it could be that it doesn't need any description at all, that it's just there to be cute or pretty, and in which case you have to mark the file, the video file, the graphics file. You have to mark the graphics file as decorative. When you do that, somebody who's blind uses something called a screen reader. That's the assistive technology that they use. When they hit a graphic that says, hey, this graphic is decorative, it skips over that. Okay, it pretends that that graphic isn't even there. If there's a description, it will describe the graphic for the person who can't see. But the really important thing is you want to use the shortest amount of text possible to convey the right level of information for the context of where this picture is being used. Because people who are blind who use screen readers, they tend to run about 3 to 5 times as long to complete the same operation as somebody who reads using vision. And so if you put Jack Russell Terrier wearing sunglasses in the hammock on beach, when really all you need is dog on beach, it takes a lot longer for somebody who's blind to listen to that. And so you want to use, that's why you want to use the shortest amount of text that gets the job done. It's more important that you get the job done. But once you've got the job done, prioritize for shortness. Okay, another really common disability to see is dyslexia. If you justify your text, if you center justify it or right justify it, you get these things called rivers of space. It makes it really, really hard for people with dyslexia to read because they have to jump, right? They see a word, it ends, they have to jump to the next word, and they might lose track of what line they're on. Excuse me. So justification causes a lot of trouble for people with dyslexia. You definitely want to avoid that. Okay, Another thing, like literally the first thing that I ever look for when I go to a new website is after the page loads, when I hit the tab key, what happens? Okay. On a compliant site, you will see something called a skip to content link. Okay. You can see this blue box in the upper left-hand corner here where it says skip to main content. That only comes up if you hit the tab button after the page is loaded. And then what that does is that allows me to bypass all of this apps and networking and workspace and security, all that horizontal nav bar, and it will just jump straight into the content. So again, this is to help people with disabilities process information faster because their disability will slow them down. And another thing that's really important is these boxes. Okay, this is called a keyboard focus indicator. So on the third example, going down on the right-hand side, there's a box that says about us, and it's got a great big black, there's a blue outline, and then there's a great big black heavy outline. This is to make it really easy for somebody who uses magnification to tell what's going to happen when I hit the return key. So where is it that the software is going to take me next? If I was here and I was about to hit the return key, I would know that it was exactly going to take us to an About Us page. Okay, so everything to be accessible has to be reachable from the keyboard. This is really, really important. All those forms of assistive technology in the SATI video, they all largely use keyboard simulation as the mode for how they work. So when a screen reader user is doing things on the screen, it's actually using the keyboard interface to execute the function. When Sadie is using the switch on her headrest to interface with that video editing software of Apple's, it's actually using a keyboard interface to transmit that information. So you can't have hover only behavior, you can't have touch only behavior, you can't have swipe only behavior, you can't have jiggle the mobile device to win a prize behavior. All of these things are considered WCAG violations because they won't be accessible to a user with a disability. Okay, so you can't have any traps. If somebody can get into a dialog box using the keyboard, they have to be able to get out of the dialog box also using the keyboard. So that's another important thing to know. And you can only require the use of one function key. So if somebody, Control-Alt-Delete, we now refer to in the accessibility community as keyboard twister. It's like the game Twister where you have to, twist yourself all around to touch all the colors to win the game. Only one function key, because remember Owen, Xbox boy, he only had one finger that he could use. You can't you can require two keys, okay? So it could be Control-D, Control-K, something like that, because a person with a disability can always hold a pencil in their mouth to simulate the second finger, but they can't do more than that. If you require more than, and the function keys are usually grouped in very particular areas, so it's hard to press multiples of them at the same time. So you get one function key and one non-function key that you can require that they use together to trigger a function that would otherwise be hover only, touch only, swipe only. So it's very common, for example, for the swipe only behavior on a mobile device, if you had a keyboard attached to it, and lots of people with disabilities use keyboards attached to their mobile devices, usually they're Bluetooth keyboards, but we will use a Control-X to delete something instead of that swipe left to delete behavior. The two will do the exact same thing. It's just one's accessible to people who can touch the screen, and the other one is accessible to everybody. Okay, and then that keyboard focus indicator, this guy that we looked at here on the lower right corner, always has to be visible, always has to have good contrast. Okay, and then you get into the more complicated stuff. So the solutions I've talked to up until now are really, really simple. They do not require extensive amounts of coding. They don't require a huge amount of IT work to implement. They're really straightforward. Status changes are the ones that get a little bit tricky. So let's say I decide I want to buy a couple of cartons of Oreo yogurt. Okay, I'm going to trick myself into thinking that it's healthy, but I really like Oreos. So I put in, 2 4-packs of this Yo Crunch low-fat Oreo yogurt into my shopping cart. So what happens? Well, first of all, I get a quantity, I get an amount. It tells me how much more I have to spend in order to get free shopping service. It tells me I've got points that I might be getting it towards, hey, maybe more free Oreo yogurt down the road. So you do one action, but lots of things happen. Okay, this number up here, the 329, that gets updated. How many items I have in my shopping cart, that gets updated. So if I'm blind and I put a bag of Oreos into my cart or an Oreo yogurt, how do I know that all those other things have changed? And the answer is you don't, unless the software, and I'm talking about HTML interfaces here, uses something called ARIA. And I'm going to put that in the chat window. It's ARIA. And it's a tool that you can use in conjunction with HTML so that you can tell somebody who's blind, oh, hey, look, all these other things happened when you put that bag of Oreos or that Oreo yogurt into your shopping cart. So if you're not doing that, that means you're not going to be providing equal access. This happens most often in retail settings. In tech settings, where it happens quite frequently is with primary and secondary data grids. So if you have a primary data grid, like a student registration list, let's say, and you're using the keyboard to go and mouse up and down between rows, and you have a secondary data grid where all the students' classes are updating over on to the side, how do you know that the classes have updated unless the person who has coded the primary data grid is doing those ARIA instructions that update the user to tell them that change has taken place? So those are the 2 most common places you're going to see that. Okay, so that is literally, not counting this one because this one's a little bit complicated to set up to here, you've got 10 seconds top of tests that your user is going to be doing to determine whether or not your site is accessible. And then maybe 30 seconds to try to put something in a cart and see what happens to it, how many announcements that you get. 45 seconds, less than a minute. If you don't get the answers that you want, boom, you're done. I'm leaving, and I'm going to go try the same thing at your competitor's site. And I can go to, 15 different sites in half an hour until I find the one that works best for me. And guess where I'm spending my money? I'm spending my money at the one that works best for me. So it's really important when and I'm sure this was true at Wells Fargo, Mudashir, that accessibility is everywhere, okay? It's not just the focus of the accessibility professionals. Communications people have to communicate in an accessible manner. Social media people have to make sure that their social media posts are accessible. Then you've got a whole training department that has to train people to do things in an accessible manner. And oh, guess what? The training has to be accessible too. You've got the training infrastructure, which is your learning management system. You've got the training itself, and maybe it's got some quizzes that are embedded in the course. All that stuff has to be accessible. Or guess what? You're not going to be able to hire employees with disabilities because they're not going to be able to complete your internal training program. It's really important for a good accessibility program to run at a company. The best way to have everybody talking about accessibility isn't to have a big accessibility team. Okay, you don't need a huge one. The best way to have a good accessibility program is to have a lot of employees with disabilities all talking about their disabilities amongst each other. Okay, your support has to be accessible, your IT has to be accessible, your HR, your recruiting, your onboarding, your payroll system, your benefits, all of that has to be accessible. Your procurement systems all have to be accessible. You have to make sure that you don't buy things that are inaccessible. And then your entire culture has to be accessible. At VMware, I'm very proud to say we have executives, okay? VPs and up, 65,000 person company. We've got like 92 VPs and senior VPs and C-suite. We have 2 of them that publicly discuss their hidden disabilities. Okay, they support the Disability Employee Resource Group. They're not our sponsors. We have other sponsors, but they have no trouble going into a room of people and say, hey, look, I'm dyslexic. You know, taking care of people with dyslexia is important to me. And what's important to executives becomes important to the staff members. And so that's why it's crucial to have a culture that supports disability, so that you get the executives having those discussions when the accessibility team isn't necessarily around.
That is true.
Okay, so how much time do I have left?
5 more minutes, I would say.
Okay, there's not too many of you, so I mean, I'm happy to answer any questions you have at this point. So I always tell people, you can choose to be accessible, or you can get sued, find out you have to be accessible, and then have to fix it retroactively. Guess which one's the easier and cheaper one to do? It's being accessible when you initially design and develop your product. Exactly. You don't want to be reactive. You want to be proactive. Bake it into all aspects of your organization. Everybody needs to be talking about, how can I play my role and make my stuff more accessible? And don't assume that just because you haven't heard that there's a problem, that you don't have a problem. This really gets to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. You think, oh, I don't think I have any issues hiring employees with disabilities. Well, guess what? Maybe you don't, because people can't fill out your application forms, right? And they don't bother to complain. They just move on to the next company and try their application forms. And, you know, my takeaway for you tonight is, no matter what the question is, make it accessible is always the right answer. It's the right thing to do for everybody, and it's always the best choice for your company.
That is so true. And thank you, Sheri. That's very powerful, you know, learning, at least for me, again, because it's not just like make your color accessible. It's about the whole culture, the awareness, and shedding of all kind of, you know, assumptions, right?
Yeah,
it's working for everyone, so yeah, nobody's complaining. But as you said, right, 92% of the people usually, you know, leave the
they don't complain.
They don't complain. They just leave the product. Yeah.
Yeah. So I often say that getting stuff accessible is easy. Keeping stuff accessible is hard.
Exactly. So it's just like gardening, right? You have to keep maintaining it.
Yeah. So to get something easy, you just need to put some IT people in a room and give them some money, right? They can make it something accessible. Keeping something accessible, you have to change all your processes. Okay, exactly. You have to change. Okay, what is accessibility part of our release gates? Are we hiring enough people with disabilities to provide us feedback? Are we doing user research with customers with disabilities? Are we providing accessible support? Are we doing accessible surveys?
Exactly.
Once you get it baked into the organization, it's not that difficult to keep that momentum going. Getting it going from a dead stop, that can be a little bit complicated and a little bit expensive the first time you try to do it.
That is true. And, you know, recently I joined Ring Central. So it's a different aspect of accessibility I'm learning, because it's an audio video kind of, you know, communication software they have. So it's a totally different kind of interaction, right? So I'm still learning that part of the world where, you know, how the accessibility can be applied in that kind of, you know, medium or model. That's what they call it.
Yeah. So my daughter thinks that text conversions of voice messages are the best thing ever. You know, she never used to pick up her voicemail because she couldn't understand it because she was deaf. But now she can see that she has a missed call. She can look at her phone and it will transcribe the message for her. Subject to the same occasional issues that you get with auto captioning where there's a word or a name.
Yeah, that's what my second point was, like, that auto transcription, right?
Yeah, what about it?
So my question is, like, like recently, as you said, just like in auto caption, there's a problem, right? Things are, I have a heavy accent, so
yeah, it's getting better, but it's normalized for Midwest accents and people who speak at a particular rate. Okay, so if you talk real fast like this, it doesn't know where one word ends and the next word begins. That can be a problem. Or accents, or names, acronyms, and technical terms are the other three things that it doesn't do particularly well. But they're getting better at it. We kind of had this evolutionary leap in quality February of last year, just right when the pandemic was kicking off. Microsoft and Google both came out with new captioning engines that were just light years better than the previous versions. And now they have dictionaries, so you can add terms and words and acronyms to the captioning dictionaries if you have the paid versions, so that you can get your captions trained and it gets better and better.
No, wonderful. This is good.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Thank you. So Lauren, Carol, Namrata, do you have any question?
Yes, we do have a few questions, definitely.
Oh, yeah.
Lauren, you want to go first?
Sure. Yes, Sheri, this was an awesome presentation. Thank you so much. I have a ton of questions. I'll just go ahead and ask my shortest question because this is one that I was working on today. I was trying to enter in some alt text for a picture that I didn't think it needed alt text, but I hadn't learned about the decorative that you mentioned.
So if you think it doesn't, then decorative is probably the correct answer. There's two really good alt text guides out there. One is put out by a nonprofit called WebAIM. So it's WEBAIM. And the other is actually the BBC, the government of the UK's television network. BBC has some great alt text guidelines. So if you ever wanted to look at how people who do it well, how do they do it? That's what you should look at.
Thank you. I know we're running out of time. Do I have time for another question?
Go for it.
Okay. My other question related to something that you mentioned about text that is embedded in images.
Yeah.
And I was running into that problem today and I had no idea what to do because I was posting pictures of things that were made like by hand. So they were like posters and like user journeys, things like that, but they included a ton of text. And the program I was using was not going to let me use more than like 300 characters for the alt text. And so I wasn't sure what to do.
Usually I would use a caption for that instead. And when I say caption, I don't mean closed captions. I mean actually a photo caption where you can put a description underneath the picture and then just repeat what the text is. There is also trying to remember, in HTML, there's one, if you're using a content management system, you're stuck with the rules of the content management system. If you're editing HTML directly, there is a longer alt text, which is called long desk. It's LONGDESC with a hyphen for long description, and that will allow you to put in up to 2,000 characters.
Oh, okay. All right.
Okay, but if you don't have the ability to do that, then I would just use an image, a caption underneath. Because the thing is, right, so the magnification blurring, that's for people with vision loss. That's not for screen reader users. So when somebody's got vision loss and they're magnifying, they're still going to see that photo caption, even though a screen reader might not pick it up.
Okay. And so I'm thinking this is going to look weird because it's a lot of text that I'm going to have in the caption. Should I also have a note on there? Because I think the visual design is going to be off when I do that.
You know, another way you could do it if you're worried about the visual design is put a signpost up. Do you know what a signpost is? It's just like the letter I with a circle around it.
Oh, information. Yeah.
The information, and then have it come up when if they click on the information button.
Oh, great idea. Thank you.
So here's a question. In the Google Doc, right, when we write something, or if I post or put something, an image or something like this, so I can put the comments over there, right? So that kind of feature you're looking for, Lauren, I guess.
Oh, sorry, I was writing. I wasn't listening.
I'm wondering, like, you know, you're looking for something like where you can embed the text for those, you know, so the screen reader can read that text instead of, like, you know, for visually impaired, you know, a person, right? So they can't read or they can't see the image, obviously. So so a screen reader can read out loud the text, what this image is, like journey map, like, you know, it's a box, the box is saying something, you know, and defining XYZ process or flow, right? Something like this. This is what you are actually wondering about.
Yeah, things that I have pictures of that were like, it's done in handwriting.
Oh, okay.
So, and yeah, it's just a picture of handwriting.
It's complicated to make something like that accessible. I think given the constraints that you described, the signpost is probably your best choice.
Okay, yeah, I'll go with that.
Then,
thank you.
Sheri, how does a signpost work then? How does a screen reader catch the signpost?
So a signpost is a button. So it will say button information, because that's going to be the description that you're going to give to the eye. And then if they activate the button, then it brings up a dialog box that says, oh, this you know, this letter contains all this handwriting, and here's what the handwriting says, blah, 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 blah.
Got it. So it's described in that manner to say that this image contains this text.
Yeah.
Cool.
And that's because alt text limits you to 240 characters. If you can't get it below 240 characters, it's like a tweet. You have to find another mechanism to convey the same information.
Got it.
Exactly.
Nice. Okay, I have another question.
Go ahead.
Sure.
So as beginners in the field of UX, is there a particular book or site that you would recommend for us to reference to learn a lot more about accessibility so that we can implement that as a part of our regular design process?
Sure. So I would say the cheapest accessibility training out there that's good, that's not terrible, is put out by a company called DQ, and they did some preparation courses for the IAAP certifications, and IAAP is the Association of Accessibility Professionals.
Okay. DQ as in Dairy Queen, right?
DEQUE. I put it in the chat window.
Okay.
So literally the training is only $35, but it's it covers all the materials you would ever need to know. Thank you for finding that, Kara. It's all the material you would need to know in order to pass the certification exam for $35. And there's also they get study sessions together and support groups. You can kind of go through the materials together with other people at the same time. It's kind of easier to do when you've got somebody else, doing it with you.
Absolutely. Okay. I think Carolina had a couple of questions. Carolina, do you want to ask them, or do you want me to ask them for you?
Please, Nam, if you could help me asking for me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, Carolina had a couple of questions, and the first one was, can you share your journey about creating an open source tool like Crest?
Sure. So that actually started with a VMware version of Shark Tank, which was a whole bunch of people got together and pitched ideas to executives. And I was relatively new to VMware at this point, so I actually started at that about it's just a little bit over 2 years ago now. And I thought, God, you know what? I really hate having to open up a web page and hit the tab button to see every single focus indicator on that screen. I wish there was a way to do it automatically. And then I realized, okay, all the tools that we have out there that are free that we use to test inspect code. They don't actually look at data. They don't actually look at live interactions. They only look at code. So how would we look at live interactions and make decisions about whether excessive behavior was accessible or not accessible? And so I started talking to some machine learning experts, and I realized we could apply machine learning to that. And that's what we ended up doing. We ended up picking some easy things to start with, like that focus indicator. So, it takes a screenshot, it simulates that keyboard press, it takes another screenshot, then it compares the two screenshots. And the difference is the focus indicator. If you don't have a difference, if they're identical, guess what? You're not compliant. And so suddenly we got down from, 25 minutes for testing a page down to 30 seconds by using this machine learning approach. It really scaled nicely. And so, it's the same as anything in life. You take small successes and you build on them. You go, oh, look, I was successful doing this. Now I'm going to try this slightly more ambitious thing. And so now we're trying to do, let me go back to my Oreo picture here. I didn't mean to do that. Okay, remember when I was talking about the Oreos and all the things that changed on the screen? Okay, yeah. Great. I can actually do that now with machine learning. Okay, I can take an action that I know generates multiple changes, and I can check to see if those multiple changes were actually announced to the screen reader user. So that's actually a much more advanced thing that we're trying to do right now through machine learning. And then it's just about getting people interested. I go do talks. I talk to other accessibility leaders about it. IBM is using it. LinkedIn is using it. The government of England is using it. They talk to their friends about it. It's largely word of mouth because they didn't feel like, so VMware isn't in the accessibility tools business. Yeah, it helps us, but it doesn't help us to keep it so that it only helps us. Right? We can give it away and it'll help lots of people. And so that's the kind of company VMware is, and they can afford to invest in that type of development, and then other people can extend it and make contributions as well.
Cool. So for those of us who don't know about CREST, is CREST like an accessibility simulator? Or, does it show you what will happen if tab was hit on the screen, and will it show you a result of everything that it'll go through? Or is it just like a test tool which will spit out a result saying, okay, it's compliant or not compliant?
It's a little bit of both. So you can run it in headless mode where it just spits out the test results, thumbs up, thumbs down, pass or fail. Or if you run it in the headed mode, it's slower, but it will actually take you through and show you what it looks like to somebody with a particular disability.
Oh, that's cool. That's very cool. Nice.
Yeah, so I think it's pretty innovative, and we're not charging for it. So hey, nice. It's located on GitLab. You can go to GitLab and look for VMware CREST, and you'll find it. We gave it its name because it's intended to run after you run the tool called Wave. So Wave is the best, most well-known free accessibility tool. What happens when waves are done? They crest. So you run Wave, you fix all your Wave stuff, then you run CREST as a final extension to Wave that uses natural language processing, pattern recognition, and supervised machine learning to look at the interactions and the data and not just the code.
Nice. That seems very interesting.
All right, I actually have to run to another call. It's a long day for me. I've got calls all the way till 9 o'clock Pacific tonight. So I appreciate the invitation. You know where to find me on LinkedIn. If you ever have any questions, I spend a lot of time hanging out there every week. So look forward to running into you guys in the future.
Sure thing.
Thank you so much, Sheri.
Sheri, you
thanks.
know, from our WCPP team, and from Lauren as well, from everyone here. It is very important for us to remember to be, to have a instead of just a UX designer, I would say inclusive designer, basically. Just this is what our motto should be. And we have your LinkedIn, and if you have any questions or thoughts we want to share with you, we will share with you on social media.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks.
Yeah,
Sounds
thank
great.
you for being
Have a
with
great
us.
Bye-bye.
evening.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
And I'll make this recording available, Sheri, to you and all the participants, hopefully by tonight.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Madison.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.